Yeah, let's do it. So, I want to thank everyone for taking time on a Sunday to listen to us. That's very special. So thanks for that already. I'm Finn, and I have Brad here with me. We're gonna intro ourselves actually after introing the idea, which we think is more important than who we are. So we're here today to talk about how we can make trillions for effective charities. Sounds like a lot, but we think it's possible. We're gonna quickly explain what the current economy is. So currently the economy is quite simple. You have consumers, they buy from companies, and these companies are sometimes funded by investors, banks, or founders. And these companies, they have costs, and if their costs are lower than their revenue, they have profits. And these profits usually go back to the investors, either founders, banks, or the investors. So that's really very simple. That's how probably 90+% of companies run right now. They generate a lot of profits. It's we guesstimated that the total amount of profits yearly around the world is around 10 trillion, give or take. And these are going to investors, banks, and founders. And some obvious examples might be Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. They're recipients of fairly large portions of these profits. And then what we propose is sort of a future economy or a different economy. And Brad, if you can jump in on this one.
Yes. Oh, shoot. Basically we want to have effective charities be in the position that currently the investors, founders, banks are in. So as you can see here, philanthropists, we could also have complex relationships with traditional investors, but basically the idea would be the equity position in a guiding company is by a effective charity rather than a traditional shareholder. So the equity gets acquired, things have costs just like the normal company, except instead of profits going to traditional investors, they go to effective charities. And what's critically effective about this model is that consumers would rather the value go to effective charities rather than traditional shareholders. So I kind of wanted to put a line, back from the profit to consumers to reflect the increased utility that the consumers, like the fact that they're helping charities, because consumers often donate some amount. So there's some amount of value that they put in money going to effective charities rather than traditional shareholders. And because a guiding company could operate the same way that a normal one could, it could have the same CEO, keep everything else constant. There isn't a reason that prices would be higher or that quality would diminish. The difference could just be, well, we're advertising where our profits go. So rather than you going to the store and you buying some toothpaste or something, you're like, where the heck is that money, the profit going? You're like, oh, I know where it's going, so I'm going to buy this toothpaste instead of the other toothpaste. So we can move on to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, so maybe if we can quickly summarize this, maybe sort of explain like on Vive. So the investors, they would basically be changed by philanthropists, and the profits or market value created, those would go to charities as opposed to investors, founders, or banks. So we're really proposing a simple change that doesn't really affect customers at all, or maybe in some sort of positive way. So Brad is the CEO of the Consumer Power Initiative, and I'm the CEO of BOAS. Maybe I can start first. So BOAS is basically the Amazon for good. So we're a sustainable marketplace, and we're donating all of our profits to charities rather than me as a founder or investors or banks. And we're trying to get philanthropists or maybe even the EA funds or the EA community or other high net worth individuals to fund us. So we're active in Europe in sustainable baby and kids products, but ultimately we want to keep adding products and categories and hopefully become one of the bigger, and if everything goes really well, the biggest marketplace in the world. And then we could generate a couple dozen billion each year for charities rather than what we have now. In the current marketplace model, we basically have the money going to Jeff Bezos and other investors. So we're really trying to sort of do that at an object level, and I think CPI is more into doing this across the economy and on a meta level. You want to take it from here?
Yeah, sure. So the Consumer Power Initiative is looking to support existing guiding producers. That's what we call these companies that work for charity. And I'm just pulling up my newsletter. There are three functions that can we see my screen right now?
We can. I can. So I'm assuming everyone.
Okay. So the three functions are to build a movement, make the public aware. The idea being that consumers aren't going to, choose guiding producers over normal producers unless they're aware of their ability to do so. So what we're doing with social media, we've got a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're looking to expand, work with influencers. We're going to make people question whether it should just be the wealthy that are benefiting from their purchases rather than charities. People already want to do good, and if they can help charities through normal economic activity, if they're not going to have to pay anymore in terms of cost or in terms of diminished quality, they're going to want to do that. So we're going to try to make people know about it, build a movement. The second function is supporting, recruiting, networking with existing guiding producers, companies. I call that guiding producer cultivation. And public awareness, won't do much unless people can do something concrete with it. That's why we're networking with existing guiding producers, like BOAS, like Bosch, like Newman's Own, and recruiting and supporting new ones. And we're going to learn, about their needs and try to get them to work together to spread the message as well. We're also looking to recruit new guiding producers. Expand it, create proofs of concept. That's why I created the Giving Store. The Giving Store is an online store that you can buy houseware, kid supplies, pet supplies, outdoors and play, lots of different products. And the beneficiary, the profits, go to Give Directly. So we're looking to expand like different kinds of things, expand the word, expand the ways that people can do it, and that'll grow the movement. It'll do good for effective charities. And it can potentially, if there's success, and we believe that if we can spread the word, we can create success, it'll show a proof of concept by which philanthropists can, say, hey, this is a good and effective way to do good. So we're going to try to create the infrastructure, try to boost people's awareness, try to create additional guiding producers. And then the final is research. So we're trying to determine the context that this will be the most effective. And then capitalize on them, as well as other things. Like maybe there are legal forums, maybe we can get tax advantages for guiding producers. What countries can they enjoy the greatest advantage? So we want to be basically supporting guiding producers by making the public generally aware of them, recruiting and supporting existing ones and having a network. And Vin is on the project of leading an advisory council for guiding producers. So I'm very excited about that. We've talked with the CEO of Newman's Own Foundation. We've talked to impact makers, and we're going to try to get a broad team to effectuate our goals.
Cool. Yeah. So we want to try and reserve the rest of the talk for some discussion points, and just hear your feedback. So maybe just to summarize everything that we've told. So guided companies, they operate just like for-profits. The profits have different recipients that we feel need that money more, basically. And if we compile all the research to data and common sense, it actually suggests that guided companies have competitive advantages over, let's say, traditional companies. So sort of the intuition of many people is to think that these companies would perform subpar or poorly as compared to the competition. But what we're actually finding is that, well, some of this makes sense. Like consumers obviously have at least a small liking towards companies who donate some of their money, but especially if they then donate all of their profits, for example. We're also finding as a marketplace that brands give us higher commissions because they like our business model more than they like the business model of giving money to investors and founders. We're getting discounts on software, advice. We're getting easier press, influencers to work with us, so we can actually lower our customer acquisition costs and our lifetime value a bit to sort of be outcompete the competition even. But ultimately, as it currently stands, guided companies lack money. We can't go to venture capital, we can't go to the stock market like normal companies, so this is a big if. But if guided companies, they have sufficient funds, the research and data currently suggests that they would actually outperform the competition by anything from a small margin to maybe even a very significant one in some cases. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the most powerful point in our favor is that it is common sense, actually, and that's that if you're a normal consumer and you have the option of buying a very similar product at the same price, and you know, hey, this one's going to help, some starving child in Sri Lanka, and the other one's going to make Jeff Bezos a little bit richer, it's a pretty easy decision. It almost relies on what I call non-psychopathy. So I think if we can create the infrastructure that lets people make this choice, they're going to choose in our favor, and they're going to want to help. People want to help all over the place, but people have to save for their families. It's hard to get people to donate. But if they can do it without cost, I think they'll do it. And that's going to be the subject of a paper I'm going to probably release later this week.
Yeah, so there's at least a couple billion people in this world who don't donate or don't have the money to donate, but they are buying from Amazon, and that generates maybe like couple $100 in profit. If that could be directed to charities, we could, in a very good scenario, be talking trillions. And currently, the companies that are owned by foundations are already directing many billions each year. So we've defined 3 discussion points, but maybe it makes sense to very quickly go through the questions that were dropped in the chat. So Patrick Bell asked, why do we not follow Salesforce model of donating 1% of top line revenue? Well, I think there's a sort of Eli already has a good reply to that there's a big difference between giving away 100% and 1%. There's also a difference between giving away part of your revenue and part of your profits. So Salesforce is software and they have a very large profit margin. So giving away 1% of their revenue might be like 5 or 10% of their profit. But if they would operate with our business model, that would be 10 to 20x that amount, which would, for example, save many more lives or have a lot more impact.
Yeah. And there's a more basic reason, and you're talking about basically having normal investors as the recipients of profit and then giving a portion of that to charities. And there's just like a structural problem there because the shareholder is the fiduciary. Basically, the job of the company, they have an ethical obligation to try to maximize profits. So anytime that you're diverting a portion of those profits to charities, you're hurting your shareholders. Now, maybe you can argue that there's a public, they look better, right? There's a publicity benefit that exceeds the cost, but there's always that sort of structural tension between doing right by your fiduciaries and giving a portion of your profit. guided consumption solves that problem because in this case, the charities are the fiduciaries. There's no conflict of interest. They're trying to maximize the value of it. So you could have a conservative economist say, hey, the job of firms should be to maximize profit for shareholders. We're like, good, maximize profit for shareholders. It's just make those shareholders be charities and advertise that. So yeah, this resolves that tension, and this is a much more elegant solution to the problem.
Yeah, and then we have Max asking, I suspect many EAs currently hold their savings in index funds. How does this differ from the status quo? I'm not entirely sure if I get what you're trying to ask. Do you get it, Brad?
Could you, maybe we could put a spotlight on them and they can explain.
Yeah, I don't know if Max...
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, I think it's more reacting. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it was more reacting maybe to the second slide where you replace investors with the, or I guess the third slide.
Yeah.
It seems like EAs are investors today to the extent that they invest in index funds, and then they extract some of the profit, and then they donate some. So from an EA's perspective,
I got it.
It seems kind of structurally similar.
So the difference would be that if you're investing in an index fund or otherwise investing and then donating, you're making money for charities, right? This is a way that you can get a bigger bang for your buck because you're leveraging the consumer sentiment and you're leveraging the sentiment of other actors in the economy. Like right now, if you're just investing, you're not getting an advantage from the fact that you're a charitable investor, right? You're getting a normal market participant yield, right? The idea is that if you're contributing to capitalizing a guiding producer, you get a bonus yield that results from people liking charities more than they like traditional investors. So basically, you're letting the world know, hey, this money is benefiting, doing good things, and you're getting a benefit from other economic participants. So basically, if you're a normal investor, you're missing out on an opportunity, and you're losing money because you're failing to let the world know about what you're doing.
Yeah, so I think Jonathan has a really good question. So is it possible that traditional investors invest in such charity-owned companies, or is it restricted to philanthropic investors? So I guess there's multiple models, right? So if we can get Sam Bankman-Fried to fund our company without wanting a return on investment, that's definitely our preferred option because we could probably direct more to charities, right? Because we don't have to pay a 10x return to Sam Bankman-Fried. But you could also have investors invest in your company and maybe cap their return on investment in case you do really well. So there's also some companies who also attract traditional investors saying, okay, if you invest $100,000, we're gonna pay you up until 400%, so 4x that, and we're only gonna do that with half of the profits. So let's say if you make $1 million in profits, you would donate half of it, and the other half would go to investors until they get 4x, and then they're sort of bought out. So there's multiple possibilities. We're not sure what the best way is. This is probably fairly complex.
Another proposed solution is, so if you have traditional investors who are risk neutral, like they're not as concerned about always winning as long as in the aggregate they win, and you have philanthropic people like Sam Bankman-Fried, maybe they're risk averse. Actually, he's risk neutral from what he says in his podcast. But for the sake of discussion, let's assume philanthropists are risk averse and they don't want to be supporting things that are effective. What you could have is them basically have payouts for the investors based on different thresholds. So like once a company donated X number of dollars, then they would pay out the investor X over 10 or something. So you could potentially have like a system where you address philanthropists' risk aversion and complement that with traditional investors' risk neutrality to fund guiding producers.
Yeah, and then we have a final question from Patrick Bell. So, do guided companies only take money from charities or nonprofits? So, I think this is sort of similar to the previous question. We can get it from, like, it could be funded by charities or nonprofits, but we think those are probably less likely to fund us than, for example, Sam Bankman-Fried. I don't think Greenpeace, Against Malaria Foundation, any charity would probably work on the cause directly and not try and make money through guided consumption. But it could be a mix between philanthropists and maybe more traditional or impact investment. So I think with time in mind, we have 8 minutes left. We can probably jump to discussion points. So Brad and I will both take one table. So if we can gather around 2 tables, I'll take the left table. Brad, if you could take the right one, and we can jump into these discussion points. So we're wondering, so how can we fund this? We have been thinking about crowdfunding, crypto, billionaires, philanthropic, venture capital, traditional investors, maybe even debt. And the other is how do we make the public aware of this? What kind of campaigns do we want to create? Influencers, press? How do we build this movement? And in which areas does it make sense to start guiding companies? Because we think,
One more thing while we have the podium, I think with this crowd particularly, if you think this is a good idea, your greatest value would be spreading this ideas to other within the effective altruism community. I think that if you think this is cool, like letting other people in the effective altruism community using your networks, that's probably one of the highest value things you could have for our project.
Yeah, and if you don't think the idea is cool, which also sometimes happens, just let us know. We're always open for criticism. We've received a lot.
Then more than me.
True. So if you hate the idea,
no, I'll always.
Let's jump to the tables. That probably means I can't continue to share, but we can have an open discussion. All right. Yeah. So let's move to the tables. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. So it seems I'm on a table. I mean, maybe if everyone can turn on their camera and their microphone, we can have a discussion on some of these points, or even another if you have a suggestion. I think we're with like 8 people on this table. Anyone has a question or an idea about one of these 3 points?
Yeah, I'm wondering about jobs in this area, like working in this area. I'm a software engineer at Amazon currently. I'm wondering at what your takes on the value of that are versus like earning to give at big tech.
Ooh, I mean, first of all, it's really interesting because Amazon is probably definitely at later stage one of our competitors. So would definitely like to talk to you outside of this as well. But in terms of expected value, I've been given the question as well. Is it not better for you to create a company or earn to give? I think why this has higher expected value is because we think that these companies have a competitive advantage if they direct all of their profits to charities. So what research and data suggests is that these companies are more likely to survive, and that they're more likely to be profitable and have higher profit margins than their competitors, because simply put, the stakeholders like this business model more than the current business model. So I guess out of that, it would also follow that you could be part of a company that might outcompete the competition and generate more profits, and that's probably I shouldn't say probably, but it might be a better way to generate value than earning to give. Having said that, Amazon is of course a very successful company, and earning to give there is a good option. But earning to give at Amazon might have like 50K a year in donations, and we think a software engineer at a company like ours would have a multiple of that, especially if we manage to become a big sustainable marketplace. There's $1 trillion market for that currently. It's growing very fast. So basically, if you multiply the odds times the value of the market, we think the expected value is definitely in the millions. We think it's in the dozens of millions, and that's much more than earning to give.
That makes sense for sure. But I guess a little bit. I guess it still have to be compared to like the counterfactual. If you didn't hire like an EA software engineer, you'd hire someone else, and that difference in value, and maybe the fact that Bose is like a charity, maybe they can attract software engineers that wouldn't have done earning to give, and so
Well, that's also very interesting. So we want to actually pay people market rates. So, we want to be able to snag people from Amazon by offering them a similar, maybe a slightly lower wage. So you could still earn to give and work in a company. We want to operate as any for-profit, right? So we want to offer market rates. And then there's this additional value that flows to charities rather than in your company's case, Jeff Bezos and everyone who owns Amazon stock. So that's also why we think it's a good option. And the counterfactual. So you're already an EA, but probably most of our employees would not be EAs. And for them, the counterfactual is an even bigger difference because they aren't earning to give. They're not aware of EA in most cases. And through the work we do, we're sort of acquainting people also with EA and maybe inspiring them to earn to give or maybe go to more impactful careers elsewhere as well.
So I'm kind of confused. Are you the marketplace for guided companies, or are you trying to generate guided companies? Like, where in the ecosystem? Is there a broader ecosystem that I didn't understand?
Yeah, so we have a marketplace for products just like Amazon. So we are a guided company, and we're not trying to sort of create more guided companies, although that's something I would like to do later on. So I think a very high impact thing would be to try and start 100 companies like these and see which ones do really well. So maybe something like venture capital for guiding companies could be very interesting.
Okay.
So Brad is working more on sort of as an institution on the movement, trying to create guided companies. So he's supporting us, and he's also supporting other guided companies or traditional companies who might want to turn into guided companies.
Okay, so if you were a single guided company operating a marketplace, and if you're not taking all your investments from charities, but you are planning to give all your profits to charities, like how does could you explain?
Yeah, so ultimately, we just like any company, we also reinvest our capital into growth. So it's sort of giving away all your profits over the lifetime of your business. So just like Amazon, they ran their company with like 15 years of having no profit, but they did that so they could grow the pie, like the market value of Amazon, faster. And that's similar to what we're trying to do, reinvest everything so we can probably give away more later. Does that make sense?
So in this structure, the beneficiary being the nonprofit or the charity, they wouldn't have control when they take the money out then. Like, this would have to be a long-term investment. It couldn't be for their like annual or 5-year financing budget.
So It depends a bit. You have many different company structures. So you could give your charities voting power, for example. So they would have power to vote on issues like these. You could also say we're not giving them voting power, but just dividend rights. So they are entitled to the profits, but the people holding the voting power, they are they make the decisions on when to give, where to give, how to give, how much to reinvest, that sort of thing. So I guess there's multiple options, right? And we're not even sure at this moment what are the best options. Do we extract a bit of normal capital as well? Do we try and give away as much as we can in the beginning, or reinvest to grow the pie? So there's many different options that are possible, but we also think that the charities wouldn't be the investors, but they would rather be philanthropists like Sam Bankman-Fried. And then the charities are up to maybe the board to decide, maybe the customers to decide, for example. It's probably going to depend on the guiding company, their owners, where they want to give, how they want to give. So that's probably going to differ.
Okay, yeah. So it seems like there's still some options to the side. And I think it depends on what's the total aim. Because either you'd have to generate dividends in order to create something for annual budgets, or this is actually why I asked about the 1% of top line revenue, right? Because that's just straight off. You get the money into the charities' pockets, and they're able to spend it for the annual budget, versus maybe 10 years down the line, they might have money, but then they wouldn't be able to use that for projects in the first 10 years. So
yes. So I'm just hopping in here. So you don't necessarily have to choose between the short term and the long term. If it is the case that people prefer guiding producers, if it is the case that people prefer charities get the money to private investors, and if you're in a market space where there isn't much differentiation, then the entry of a guiding producer will translate into increased market cap. Increased market cap will translate into increased share value, and you can borrow against the increased share value to exceed the cost of the initial capitalization costs. So if you needed $100 million to do the leveraged buyout, but that allows, because people prefer guiding producer to normal producer, you could borrow against the increased equity and get $150 million next week. So there isn't this sort of short-term, long-term conflict, provided that guided consumption works.
Well, I guess it depends on which company. When we were talking about the marketplace and Amazon wasn't profitable for quite a number of years, as you guys have mentioned. So I guess you'd have to deliberately steer away from that, which as a marketplace, it sounds like you'd have to actually first invest into it. So maybe marketplace actually isn't one for your short-term investments.
No, so marketplace is a good example of something that needs a lot of investment to generate a lot of profit later on. So you definitely want to have somewhat patient philanthropists maybe who are okay with waiting for sort of a return on their donation, if you want to call it like that.
But the idea is that guided consumption doesn't necessarily depend on patient philanthropists. If the model takes off as an idea, and if people would exhibit their preference for supporting charities rather private investors, where you give them the choice, that power will translate into market capitalization, which would allow for rapid deployment of funds.
So I understand the idea of, I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing this conversation for other people. Actually, maybe I'll let someone else talk first. So I'll just give my comment really quick. So I understand the idea of being tied towards philanthropy and that being a boon for people, the eventual customers of this ecosystem. But it doesn't seem like this is the only way. The nobles will donate a pair of shoes when you buy a pair of shoes. Salesforce will donate 1% of top line revenue. So it seems like there might actually be other more direct ways of benefiting charities. This is interesting, but I think there are limits in terms of which businesses you enter, which will eventually impact how you get money to charities?
No, I mean, I think that you get an advantage as a guiding producer in that people will prefer to buy from you in front of that, and there isn't a disadvantage. So there's an advantage, there's a structural advantage without a structural disadvantage. So putting equity in charities essentially creates a strictly superior company and from a competitive standpoint. So I mean, I think 1% of revenue is, it's not going to be as attractive to the consumer. It's not going to be as attractive to other people's. And donating a shoe, maybe what the global poor don't need is a shoe. They need money that effective charities can help. So I disagree, and I think that these models are much less effective than having charities be in the equity position.
Yeah, so maybe if I can add to that. So basically, you could be a philanthropist and you could say, okay, I'm going to invest in for-profit companies or traditional companies to try to turn $1 into 10. And what we're thinking might be the case if those people invest in guided companies, they would turn $1 into 11 or 12 instead of 10, because we have at least a small competitive advantage, is what the data suggests. So for philanthropists trying to maximize the amount they can give over their lifetime, for example, it might make sense to invest in guided companies, because that could increase their giving at a faster rate than them, for example, going into an index fund or going to traditional venture capital to try and increase their money. But if you want to make impact now, then yeah, sure, then you donate to Against Malaria Foundation. But if you're more patient, and for example, if you're Sam Bankman-Fried, you only have so much to give every year to effective charities, it might make sense to use the other. I think currently he's worth like 14 billion, maybe he's donating 1 billion a year. It might make sense to use some of that money to invest in guided companies whilst it's sitting in his bank anyway. So it's a bit more patient money, but down the line it might make more impact.
Yeah, but I would like to emphasize that if this becomes potent, if this idea proliferates with the general public, I don't think that being patient would be necessary. You could, create guiding producers, enjoy an increased market expansion, and borrow against increased equity to have donations happen rapidly.
Are we making sense? We're not. Cool. Anyone else who has a comment or would like to ask something?
I hope this is not too basic a question, but how is this different from non-profits?
I'm sorry, what? It was difficult to hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, your non-profit organizations and non-profit companies, how are they different from guided companies?
So a guiding company is a for-profit company that has the nonprofit companies in the equity position. Like, in a normal company, you could have people that own shares of stock, right? Mm-hmm. You could have private investors, they own so much stock. The idea with a guiding company is you would have charities effectively hold the equity, be in the equity position. Mm-hmm. So they're the beneficiaries of the profit of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe... Sorry, go ahead.
No, they can't do that right now with non-profits. I mean, can't a charity just set up?
They can do that right now, but the idea with guided consumption is having philanthropists basically have it so that the entire company has that position, and then they advertise that to the general public. So the general public chooses to discriminate in favor of the guiding company that's helping a charity over companies that are owned by private investors. the idea is consumers would rather help charities than help rich people get richer.
Yeah.
So you use that factor to gain a competitive advantage.
I see. Thanks.
No problem.
Cool. All right. I think if those are all the questions, comments, and discussions, then maybe we can wrap this up. Any final thoughts from someone? All right. Cool. Then I think everyone can maybe jump on another call. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. See ya.